Okay, today we are in Sim Kafei Halacha Beis. I told you a different time that in order to time to transfer, this is Sim Kafei is all about how time transfers, like what it takes to get it happening. That you have to have heat. Then we talked about that it has to be outside this way. Okay, so now there's a second rule. That is that as a rule, time transfers only if it's in the Kli Rishon. Okay, Kli Rishon means the pot or the pan. We'll use the word pot, but pot or pan or whatever it is, with the cooking, the food was originally heated up in. Even if that pot is not on the fire anymore, but if it was the thing that was used to heat up the food, that's a Kli Rishon. In contrast, the Kli Sheini is if you take it out of that original pot and you move it someplace else. So just to mention some little questions about Kli Rishon and Kli Sheini before we move on. There's a big question about what happens if you have something that's on the fire and it's a Kli Rishon, but it hasn't yet gotten to be Yatzla this way. Okay, so that sounds like a really theoretical question. It's very negay l'maisa in industrial factories, particularly in cheese companies, where they heat the milk up to very, very close to Yatzla this way. We consider Yatzla 120 as the cutoff. So if they heat it up to 118, so it's really close. So obviously the pot is it's on the fire, as we consider it to be on the fire, but the food is not Yatzla this way. So we spoke about this a different time. By coincidence, it's going to be coming soon also, but a different time about there's a shach about this who says that there is a blia in that case, and the Pri Megadim says that no. He says there's no blia me oichel. Again, there's no blia me oichel kli, but there is blia me kli oichel. Okay, so that means is if the treif cheese were not put into the pot, the double O, to the equipment that's being used, but the other way me kli oichel, if the machinery was treif because he had made hot cheese, then the blia would go into the kosher food. Which we spoke about it then about how you kasher cheese equipment. When do you have to kasher? When do you don't have to? Just because on the Yatzla display there are examples when you have to kasher.
So even though it's on the Yatzla display,
even though the kosher is on the Yatzla display, if the treif had been over Yatzla display, so the blia went in, that we don't have to do anything special for that. And for that, the shach says mi kli la'oichel goes if it's on the fire but it's not Yatzla display, it goes mi kli la'oichel. Doesn't go mi oichel, doesn't go mi oichel l'kli. So it wouldn't go from the treif cheese that's below Yatzla display into the kli. That's fine. It wouldn't become treif. But the other way around, mi kli la'oichel, that would be a problem.
that's not what we do though.
I didn't say it's what you do. So if they made Parmesan today, it was treif, then the Kli is for sure treif. That's no question. We say, you might think, you say, well, if I'm doing kosher now, all I'm doing now is kosher. It's below Yatzla display, so I'm okay, I don't have to kasher. That's the shas is not there. Okay. Another thing is, the Shulchan talks about is what happens if there was no Kli? What happens if you roasted a piece of meat over fire? Okay, so now there's no Kli, so no soda, and I put it onto a plate. Does that plate have a din of a Kli Rishon? He talks about that. It's the first Kli, but it's not the Kli that you cooked on. And okay, that's Shaili talks about. Okay, so now the earlier poskim. Okay, what I just told you about Kli Rishon is fine. It's Kli Rishon. Poskim in Kli Rishon is for sure regular full amount of transfer of time. Earlier poskim speak of what happens if you have is there time in the Kli Sheini. So the Mechaber and the Ramah say we're machmer lechatchila to assume bli happens in the Kli Sheini. But by the Evid, you could be making and assume no bli happens. Some of the Achronim don't agree with that. Some of the Achronim are not so sure about that. The Mishnah Berurah says that to follow like the Mechaber says, Chacham Zaden says at least in Makom Hesed you could be makel. So by and large we're makel about that. By the Evid for Kli Sheini, and this is interesting. The Chassam Sofer says, well, if you're going to be machmer by the Kli Sheini, not just Kli Sheini, it just means anything that's not a Kli Rishon. So you machmer a Kli Shlishi also. The Chassam Sofer says that. And the Pesach Tshuva brings Sim Tzadi Daled. Pesach Tshuva says I got that the Chassam Sofer says that. He says that most Rabbanim are not machmer for that for a Kli Sheini, for Shlishi that, and the Mishnah Berurah says the same thing also. It's brought in the Shar Tziyun, and Rav Osner also say that once it's out of a Kli Sheini, we're not machmer at all. B'diavad. I'm not talking about l'chatchil, b'diavad. Okay, so some of I have 4 exceptions to this rule about where we differentiate between a Kli Rishon and a Kli Sheini. Okay, 4 exceptions to the rule. One is like this. One is when you have Kli Sheini together with ducha the sakina. Okay, when you cut something, cut or grind something hard, then we say a tam goes in even take klipa, even though it's in a Kli Sheini. Okay, that's one exception. A second exception is that a double charif, which is in a Kli Sheini.
That doesn't. So that case. So you said it was hot.
It's a Kli Sheini and it's hot. Yes.
No, I'm saying with the knife case, ducha sakina.
It's hot.
It was hot. So it's not really that knife's not really like Kli Sheini. It's not Kli anything, right? It's Kli nothing. It's nothing.
No, the piece of treif meat is in the Kli Sheini.
The tree piece of meat is Kli Sheini.
Right. And so now we could have Blios into or out of that Kli Sheini because of ducha sakina.
So you wouldn't say that if the piece of meat is not a Kli Sheini, so it's in a Kli Yasiri.
So that depends on this other thing. This would we say ducha sakina? Would what I said to you before about Kli Sheini and ducha sakina? That I don't know. That you're confusing me. No, too many pieces together. When they just say Kli Sheini, in general, even those who are machmer about a Kli Sheini aren't machmer if it's past the Kli Sheini. Now you wonder what would they say with ducha sakina?
I'm trying to get about this Kli Sheini part. Is that dafka?
I don't know.
As long as the food is hot.
I think so, but I don't remember. Okay. My second exception was double charf. And that is, it's a shach that says that if you have a double charf in the Kli Sheini, has the status of being a Kli Rishon. Okay? Double charf, it's in a Kli Sheini, doesn't get downgraded to Kli Sheini, it stays like it's a Kli Rishon. I don't remember the reason for that. Okay? It does, you don't have to, if you kasher that, you don't have to kasher on the fire, because the mice it's not on the fire. Okay, that's a side point, but we consider it like a Kli Rishon.
Double charf is a Blios?
Double charf, that's hot, like physically
I thought
temperature.
The matter in charif is that it doesn't matter what temperature it is, that the fact that it has charifos.
The charifos is a property that it has that doesn't make time transfer just because it's charif. If I stick my a potato into a pot of treif vinegar for a second, it doesn't become treif. It doesn't transfer automatically. Charif doesn't make it automatically transfer, but it has certain chumras to it. In certain situations, it has certain chumras to it. So
those chumras work together with heat.
So in this case, in the shach says if it's charif and it's also hot, it's not in the Kli Rishon anymore, but it's hot and it's charif. That together has the status of a Kli Rishon. It sort of joins together. I don't remember the logic of it.
The Blios were charif, or the thing in the pot right now is charif. So the thing in the pot now is charif, right?
However you want to make the transfer, whatever the thing that's going to help with the transfer. Is it treif going into the pot or treif taking time out of the pot? I don't know if it makes a difference in that.
Really? The Blios is old Blios in there. That's right now. Right now it's in Kli Sheini and there's water in there. But in the past there was treif.
No, I didn't say that. No, I said if what's treif in the pot now is charif, puts Blios into the pot, or what's kosher is charif and it's taking treif Blios from yesterday out of the pot. That also would do that.
Okay, so there's stuff in the pot is charif now. We're not talking about what the Blios.
Right? No, not the Blios charif. No, the thing itself. Now, so it sounds like an interesting theoretical question, but Diane Posen, that's how from a long time ago, came up with a meaningful nafkamina for that, and that is when you kasher a vinegar plant, kashering in a vinegar plant. So vinegar is of course charif. So you usually when we want to kasher a regular company, a regular piece of equipment, we say is we by and large say kabbalah kach poltai. If it was a Kli Rishon, kasher is Kli Rishon. Kli Sheini, wherever it is, we could follow, give or take. I'm going to talk some exceptions in a second, but give or take, we follow the way the food was. That's what the kashering has to be. So in the pot, the kettle that was cooked in, we do as a Kli Rishon. Then if the water flows through a pipe, we flow our water through that same pipe also. He says, but if we're doing that with vinegar, it's not the same thing. Now, vinegar is not often hot in the factory, but it could be. Sometimes they'll pasteurize it. It could be. But the point is that the vinegar goes from the kettle into a Kli Sheini. So we would say, if it was just apple juice, grape juice we were kashering after, we would say, okay, now pour the water into that Kli Sheini, and we could kasher with kabbalah kach poltai. But when it's vinegar, it's a double charif. The double charif that made it treif is treated like it's Kli Rishon. My kashering water is only Kli Sheini, so then I can't kasher like that. Okay, so you have to upgrade your kashering. It's not the same as kashering after something else treif. Treif meat would have been like that. We would have just said kabbalah kach poltai. And over here, because it's charif and it's a Kli Sheini, we treat it like a Kli Rishon. Okay. The third exception to this rule of Kli Rishon and Kli Sheini is a davar gush, which is that sometimes when the Kli Rishon, the Isser that moved from a Kli Rishon is solid, somehow it potentially doesn't have the weakness of Defanos Mekariros, which I'm going to talk about in a second, and therefore it might be have not become a Kli Sheini just because moved into another thing. I'm going to talk about that in the future. Okay, that's really in Halacha Gimel. So today we're in Halacha Beis. I'm going to wait to talk about that. Okay, and the last exception was the Ramah says that if you have a blia of a Kli Sheini that happens on Pesach, then we're machmir even b'diavad. Okay, but it only happens on Pesach, not before Pesach. Okay, so if you put excuse me something into it, like a pot, you put something into it until you took out a tray plate on Pesach, excuse me, and you put something into it, we'd be worried about blias. Okay, there are potential coolers if it's also in the binyayma, which again you probably would be, but anyhow, that's just one more exception. Okay, so now let's now talk about what the difference is between Kli Rishon and Kli Sheini. I'm going to say it in short because we talked about it 100 years ago. I like this, and the difference in a Kli Rishon and Kli Sheini comes from a Taisus who wants to know is what's the difference. We understand that, or at least we accept that if there's a difference in temperature, something is hotter or colder, it could affect whether there's blios or not blios. And Taisus says, well, what's the difference between a Kli Rishon and Kli Sheini? Why does that make a difference whether time transfers or not? And Taisus says, which you've heard 100 times, that is that in a Kli Rishon, the walls are increasing the heat on the food, and somehow that makes time transfer better, as opposed to in a Kli Sheini, the Defanos Mekariros, the Defanos are drawing heat away from the food, and since the temperature is going down or the temperature is being drawn away, that makes it that we don't have as much of a bleed. Okay, so I don't know if I can explain that to you from a scientific perspective, but at least it gives us a gather, an understanding of Kli Rishon is the time the heat is. Things are increasing in heat. Heat is coming from the pot into the food as the food is getting hotter or maintaining its heat, and opposed to Defanos Mekariros and Kli Sheini, the heat is being drawn away from the food, and therefore we now at least have a gather why here there is blia and here there's not blia. Okay, so Ataz says, if so, what happens if I have a Kli Sheini that doesn't have Defanos Mekariros? Okay, I managed to make it so hot that there's no Defanos Mekariros. He says, so then. If so, it should be a Kli Rishon because it's not Defanos Mekariros anymore.
No,
let's say take a pot out of the oven. They do that now.
That's Kli Rishon.
No, so where's that? That's a Kli Rishon. Even if it leaves the fire, it's off. So stays a Kli Rishon.
No. You transfer the contents into a new pot.
Yes.
Or a new serving pan, whatever. Mm-hmm. But in order to make sure that the contents stay hot, what they do is they take an empty pan and put it in the oven until it warms up.
So it's a Kli Rishon. It's a Kli Rishon. It's a pot that was on the fire.
Even if
you just moved from one Kli Rishon to another Kli Rishon, that didn't help you anything. But what happens if you heat it up so much that you managed to do it? We'll give you an example in a second. Just hold the examples for a second, but there will be examples. So if there's no Defanos Mekariros, so the Taz says if so, that should be it should have the status of a Kli Rishon. So the Taz says sounds nice. He says it sounds good. He says, but I would only do it l'chumra. So if that happened, you'd have to kasher this kli as if it was a Kli Rishon. He says, but I wouldn't do it l'kula. L'kula would mean is, the way Pri Megadim explains, is that l'kula means is, I wouldn't say is, that if it became treif as a Kli Rishon, I can't kasher it by just saying I accomplished the point that it's no longer Defanos Mekariros. Okay, I can't be makel and say I kashered it good enough because I did Defanos Mekariros. No, if it was a traditional Kli Rishon, you have to kasher as a Kli Rishon. Okay, and this, well, I'm not going to give the examples now, but it's a question on those who want to say that we can, if we make an Irui go for long enough that there's no more Defanos Mekariros. That's like if I build up the heat until the point there's no Defanos Mekariros, I can kasher something as if I can kasher what was a Kli Rishon just by pouring water on it for long enough that it's no longer Defanos Mekariros. Okay, like the spray ball. If I can get it to that point, I've accomplished it. I made it. Now I kashed it. It was a Kli Rishon, and I made it like a Kli Rishon. Well, the Pri Megadim and the Chavas say sort of from the Taz says no. You can only do it l'chumra, not l'kula. Okay, so what's the reason why you should do it? You shouldn't do it l'kula. So I'll speak it out for what it's worth. Okay, it's not worth. I'm going to skip it. Okay, just time-wise, I'm just going to skip it. Okay, so. There's a bunch of examples where this Taz comes out, where this Taz is Lamaisa. I'm not going to tell you the details now because we spoke about it a million years ago. not called kelim, but it's negated to trailers, filling equipment, and other things where the metal that's there becomes saturated with heat. Think about a filler. For hours on end, there's hot product pouring through this filler, or the trailer. The trailer has very thin walls, and they're insulated. So if you put in product that's 150 degrees or 175 degrees, if thousands of gallons of stuff in an insulated thing with a very thin metal, the metal is going to be saturated with heat. There's going to be no more Defanos Mekariros after a couple of minutes. So the Blia happened in a way that was not a Kli Rishon, but it was not Defanos Mekariros. The walls are completely saturated. They're not drawing any heat away from the product. So when we kasher, we have to mimic that. We have to make sure we don't run the water through just for 1 minute. We have to make sure we run the water through until we've also made it that there's no more Defanos Mekariros. So on the filler, if we just run it through for 10 bottles, it's not going to work.
I see a very big difference between a trailer where you put in product one time, and where you're continuously adding new hot product from a Kli Rishon.
Okay.
Right, putting it for one time only, despite the fact that it's thin walls and they're insulated. Initially, the Defanos Mekariros. That is the classic case of a Kli Sheini.
Yes. And
it's hard for me to say it's over, and you overturn it. Well, the Gemara is talking about a thick Kli. This is a thin Kli. It's not the same as when I continuously adding new stuff into a Kli Rishon. Into a Kli Sheini, and it's the stuff I'm eating and it's coming out of a Kli Sheini and it's hot, so it'll take away the Defanos Mekariros. This is not a classic. This is not a case I just pour from a Kli Sheini. So you're trying to overturn the Gemara. Oh, it's a thin Kli. The Gemara says Kli Sheini is a Kli Sheini. No, I see this difference.
So I hear the difference that you're making. I'm not overturning the Gemara. In any normal pot in your house, any normal thing that you put in your house, because it's exposed on the outside, it will always be Defanos Mekariros. Because the outside air it's 70 degrees in the room, the soup is 150 degrees, so the walls are going to keep on drawing heat away from them. Okay, this insulated thin truck is a very unusual situation. There's no outside air that affects it. So if give it a few minutes, there's no more Defanos Mekariros. Now the Blia could happen. The first minute didn't happen because it was a Kli Sheini. But after a couple of minutes,
any insulated Kli.
Well, it's not such a typical thing, and also they hold thousands of gallons at the same time.
Let's say a thermos is a Kli Sheini. But it's a Kli Sheini. Don't say it's insulated, so it's not a Kli Sheini.
I know a dusty like a cup like this, it would not be considered a Kli Sheini. Or if you use this to make a Kli Sheini, you can't do it.
Really?
Yeah. Okay, I don't remember which way you held like that, but okay, that's fine. So anyhow, okay.
As he says, it's insulated.
Now back to a home situation. It comes up in homes. Classic place where it comes up in a house is a ladle. Okay, if I put a ladle into I take a pot of soup off the fire. Let's say I take it off the fire and I stick the ladle into it. The ladle is, compared to the pot of soup, is very small. If you leave the ladle in for long enough, it won't be Defanos Mekariros anymore. Okay, the ladle is surrounded by soup on all sides, and given a minute, it's going to be all heated up. So the ladle now doesn't have the status of a Kli Sheini anymore. Okay, negaya too. If I pour it from there into something else, it's Irui from a Kli Rishon. Negaya to Hilchos Shabbos. There's questions about Hilchos Shabbos about that. And not for today. Question about Hilchos Shabbos about that, or if I want to catch the ladle itself. Okay, that's one case.
You understand that could be a classic case. You put it in the Kli Rishon. The ladle is in the Kli Rishon on the fire.
Okay, I got what you say is the difference.
No, whatever. This beside
another one. Okay, yeah.
No, this is that's
because it's in the Kli Rishon.
This is even if you don't agree with the Taz. You don't think you have to like the Taz. This is not in the Kli Rishon, right? So
right. Okay, that's fine. Okay, now another case that I think is an example, an exception. An exception to this is a microwave. Okay, when you cook food in the microwave, the only thing that gets hot is the food. Okay, that's the way the magic of the way microwaves work is that the microwave heats up the food. The bowl or the plate that the food is on isn't hot. So this is a really unusual situation where the food is hot and the pot is not hot. Okay, so usually in a pot, when you put a pot of spaghetti on the stove, the pot gets hot first, and now it adds heat to the food on the inside. Right? The fire heats the pot, that heats the water and heats the spaghetti. But over here, it's the other way around. Here, the spaghetti in the bowl is what's hot, and it's heating up the bowl. The bowl's only hot because of the food. So on the surface, it sounds exactly like Defanos Mekariros. It sounds like it should be treated as a Kli Sheini because the heat it's drawing heat away from the food, actually. The only reason why it's getting hot is because the food, it's leaking, so to speak, out of the food. It's not coming the other way around. So on the surface, it sounds like it should be automatically a Kli Sheini. In practice, I don't think any person can treat it like that. They all treat it like a Kli Rishon. And my impression of the reason is because over here, where we have something that's the whole process is it's getting hotter and hotter and hotter. that seems much more like a Kli Rishon. Okay, it's not technically the Defanos are not mechamas, but the thing is getting hotter and hotter. People treat that like a Kli Rishon. Okay, but I'm saying you could argue that it's not like that. Okay, now let's move on to our almost last thing we have to talk about, and that is we talked about Kli Rishon and we talked about Kli Sheini, and the in between of that is Irui Kli Rishon. Okay, Irui Kli Rishon means I poured it. It started from Kli Rishon, that ended up in the Kli Sheini. So what's the din for that? So we say the blia is for that as a kedei klipa. Okay, the blia is not like a Kli Rishon or blia, not like a Kli Sheini that we hold ikar din. There's no blia, but it's a kedei klipa. Okay, we will talk about it in the future. One time, a shayla that Acharnim asked is why don't the rules of Tatagavar play a role over here? That's a shayla for a different time. Okay, and there's also a taz that says that says if you do that a lot of times, not continuous like we were talking about before, a lot of times, that also makes it like a Kli Rishon. Okay, most of the places can say that's not. They don't agree with that. Okay, put that on the side. So when
What do you mean do a lot of times?
if I do many times, I always do Irui onto this thing. Maybe that should have a status of like a Kli Rishon.
That's the
That's,
same
that's
as the
exactly
other
what you were just saying.
No, not.
With the filler, that's the case.
No. Without overcoming the Defanos Mekariros, I just do many Iruis on it. Many Iruis, it's like a build-up. There's so much Blia, it's as if now it spreads to the whole thing. Different than the filler where we say it's a Kli Rishon because the Defanos not Mekariros
so I
anymore.
can do 1 o'clock, 1 and 2 o'clock, 1 and 3 o'clock.
I don't know exactly, but something like that. But most of the places,
saturates the first bleed and goes to
like pushes it on. I don't remember exactly how he says. Most of the places didn't buy it. They don't accept it. Okay. Now, once there's this rule about Irui Kli Rishon that Irui Kli Rishon only lasts is only when it pours. Okay, when it's pouring from the Kli Rishon. Once it's beyond being pouring, it becomes a Kli Sheini. That happens every time, right? Kli Rishon turns into a Kli Sheini at a certain point. At some point, it stops being Irui Kli Rishon and becomes Kli Sheini. Okay, the dividing line between Irui and Kli Sheini is called.
I missed that.
Okay, every Kli Sheini came from a Kli Rishon.
The contents. I mean,
Right.
Yeah.
So the Kli Rishon has full blias, the Kli Sheini Ikar has no blias.
Right.
The Irui has kedei klipa. So at what point did it stop being Irui Kli Rishon and it became Kli Sheini?
But I would imagine once the liquid stops sitting directly.
So the answer is it's called nifsa kakiluach. Okay, the flow stopped. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you about that today, but when we talked about some time ago about washing dishes together and dishwashers, I spoke about the poskim speak about what's considered nifsa kakiluach. Does it mean is that just the first hit that hit what hits it that's nifsa kakiluach, or does nifsa kakiluach means as long as it's in its original flow from the thing
that's filling up? You're saying it's still flowing in, but
as it's flowing. Does it depend on? Does it depend if it comes from a Kli Rishon that's on the fire? Maybe when it comes from on the fire, it's never nifsa kakiluach. That's another sheet. We talked about this back then. And all of them played into washing your dishes in the same sink, milchig inflation in the same sink or dishwasher. Okay, we talked a bunch of times then about that. I'm not going to tell you about that. Okay, I'm just telling you there's such a thing. Okay, two other things about Irui. Most poskim, in my understanding, contemporary poskim think that when water flows through a pipe from a hot water tank, okay, in your house, okay, you're on the second floor and you have water flowing from the basement all the way up to there, they treat the water that comes out of that pipe as Irui from a Kli Rishon. The hot water tank is a Kli Rishon, of course. You heat up the water in there. Even though it's a really long distance, right, it traveled all the way up, 50 feet of pipe, that's considered to be not nifsa kakiluach. Okay, I'm not saying what happens after it leaves the pipe, but as it pours out of the pipe, most consider that to be Irui Kli Rishon. And then we once spoke about.
But why should it be nifsa kakiluach?
Well, it's a really long distance. It's going. So we usually think of nifsa, Irui Kli Rishon just like you pour it, but okay. And then there was also a shayla about, we spoke about this once by meat, what happens if it's not a flow, it's just a spritz. Okay, it's not like this flow. When you think of pouring, you think about like you poured something. There's a nice flow. One of them is just a spritz. It's a machlokes in Achronim, whether that's also has the din of Irui Kli Rishon. It was negated to there. When you as part of taking off the hide off an animal, the government wants you to vacuum the hide to keep and to it's like a sterilization and cleaning up of the hide to avoid garbage and bacteria getting from the hide onto the carcass. That's the part you're going to eat. The hide you're not going to eat. And there's a shaila about spritzing that comes in from that vacuum has a spritz to it. That was a shaila to whether is that considered Irui Kli Rishon or not? Because you're not allowed to make things hot. I'm sorry, before you do malicha, you can't make them hot. Okay, that's a shaila whether that's considered Irui or not. Okay, we talked about that. Okay, now there's a whole another part here that I'm not telling you because I did it. You don't know, but I did it a few weeks ago about how this whole din of Irui and Kli Rishon applies to tunnel pasteurizers. So I'm not going to explain to you how tunnel pasteurizers work or how we cash them. I'm just going to talk about the prat that was the get to this part, and that is, you could listen to a recording a different day if you want to hear about them. And that is like this: tunnel pasteurizers and cooling tunnels, they both do the same thing. They take bottles or cans or something like that, and either they heat them up or they cool them down. Okay, so when they heat them up, just for short is if this was the can.
It's using steam or it's just dry heat?
No, you pour hot water onto them. By pouring hot water, either heats it up or cools it down.
Through the tunnel, there's hot water that's...
It passing through and water's pouring onto it, either making it hotter or making it colder. Okay?
That water is going to be a Irui Kli Rishon, you're saying?
So, in the case of something that's heating up, that means is the can that's going through here came in cold and hot water is pouring onto it. Okay, so on the surface, it sounds like it's Irui Kli Rishon. Okay? People do not treat it as Irui Kli Rishon. If it was Irui Kli Rishon, that means, okay, let's do the other case. Let's do the case with cooling down. That's the easier case. I take a bottle that's already hot and I put it into there and I pour cold water onto it. I don't pour cold water, I pour hot water onto it and then a little cooler and cooler and cooler until eventually at the end it's very cold. Okay, so that's a case of Irui Kli Rishon. The water that I'm pouring on is just Irui onto it. Since Irui is only K'dei Klipa, that means is the treif that's in this can can't get bleed out into the food, into the water that's out there, because there's a klipa in between this. There's a can. There's like the klipa in between them.
Where was the Irui Kli Rishon? From the beginning, you're saying?
The water is pouring onto it. Yeah, as it comes in, the hot water pouring onto this can of hot. Yeah, pouring onto it. So we say no. The bleed is only k'dei klipa, can't get out. So the water and the machine doesn't get treif. Okay, because the treif that's in here can't get out past the k'dei klipa. The can is the k'dei klipa. Okay, but what happens in the other direction when it's heating it up? So you would say at the surface you would say the same thing. What the water that's it's only Irui Kli Rishon. Hot water is pouring onto this. It's only Irui Kli Rishon. So the blear that's in here can't get out, or the blear that's out there can't get in. Okay, because we have a k'dei klipa protecting it. There's the can, the container. Okay, in practice, most people assume not like that. They assume that it does transfer. And the reason is because over here, this is like the microwave case I told you beforehand that you didn't like. It's like the microwave case I told you beforehand, and that is, we're taking a can of cold product and we're heating it up. It's getting pasteurized inside the can. Okay, so we wouldn't say this is only Irui. It's not Irui. This water is causing that by the time this is finished, the stuff that's in here is 160 degrees. Okay, it's heating the stuff up. Okay, so it's like a super duper, not Defanos Mekariros. It's starting with Irui. The function is Irui, but just like in the microwave, the heat is spreading from the food out. Over here also, the heat is coming through what looks like an Irui, but most people say, nah, that's considered like a Kli Rishon. Okay, and there's a bleed goes through and doesn't just go k'dei.
Why couldn't you take it into any regular pasteurizer?
Also,
they have a pasteurizing system. You got a boiler heating up steam, and you got a heat exchanger where that steam transfers the water. Then you got the water going to the pasteurizer, and when that water heats up the product, so you got this fire is way over there, and what's in the pasteurizer? Well, it's regular Irui. Well, it is Irui.
So you're saying it's the same idea, the same concept that since it's heating it up, we treat it like it's a Kli Rishon. We don't say it's like Irui.
The purpose of it is to heat up the final product. Then
right. Its function, Lamaisa, is getting it very hot. Okay, so that's a fair example. In that case, I could argue with you. I'm not going. I could argue with you that maybe that's not Irui altogether. All those things are all connected and really connected to the fire. Here, the water is pouring. It's putting out
the pipes in the boiler. You said it's Irui, right? You said maybe it should be less. But,
okay. So we can negotiate about that. Okay. I just want to throw in things. I'm not going to get to Kli Rishon part of it, but I'll just throw in about these tunnel pasteurizers. Is that three coolers that tend to play a role into this also? Is that, first of all, a lot of the times what goes through tunnel pasteurizer is glass. And we're machmir l'chatchila for glass, but the evid will make it. So that's a tzad l'hakol in a lot of cases. A lot of times, what's going through here now, many times, what's going through is not a can, but a glass jar. That's one thing. Second is we have this general kula that certain blias only transfer a certain amount through the Defanos Mekariros. Okay, remember the stuff in a sealed can, in a jar, or whatever it is. So we have to think about how much the time transfers through. We say only limited amount of time transfers through. And last is, excuse me, if the only shaila that we have here is between milchiks and parav, not treif and kosher, in many cases, what's in there will be if it's only that much percent milchiks, and if we don't say chanan, okay, these are all just something that I'm mentioning, and we don't say chanan on it, it might not be so bad that the time that would transfer through would make the water milchiks, or the other way around. Okay, so they're just other factors. I said it really quickly. I'm sorry about that.